Hello, my name is Julie Smith, and I'm the Executive Director of the Identity Defined Security Alliance, and I want to thank you for joining us today. Our webinar is presented by IDSA member Silverfort, entitled Unified Identity Protection, Turning Zero Trust into Reality. Obviously, it's a very timely topic with the release of the OMB strategy for federal agencies yesterday. And before we started, I want to mention a few housekeeping items. We are recording today's session, so please make sure to share the link with your colleagues. We will also be posting the slides from the presentation after the session. There are a few polling questions in your portal, and as the presentation unfolds, please submit your answers. We encourage you to also submit questions for our speakers through the Q&A chat window. Lastly, we are now an approved ISC² CPE submitter partner. There's a link in the portal where you can provide your ISC² member number, and we will submit for CPE credits on your behalf. So before I turn it over to our presenters today, I just wanted to provide a quick commercial for the Identity Defined Security Alliance. The IDSA is a nonprofit organization that facilitates community collaboration to help organizations reduce risk by providing education, best practices, and resources to implement identity-defined security. Our vendor membership is comprised of leading identity and security vendors, in addition to our customer advisory board members who provide guidance on our mission and represent the practitioner community. In addition, we have recently introduced 2 new membership types for end users and end user companies. You can check out the membership page on idsalliance.org for more information. All of our resources are freely available on our website, so check back frequently for latest blogs, upcoming webinars, and events. So let's get started. We have 2 presenters today. Yaron Kastner, who is co-founder and CTO of Silverfort, and his partner in crime, Director of Product Marketing, Yiftech Kashet. So with that, I'll hand it over to them.
Okay, thanks, Julie.
Thank you, Julie.
Hi, everyone. We're very honored to be here on this platform together with our peers from IDSA. And the topic today is zero trust, and what are the best practices, or how can we transform it from I would say from high-level buzzword into an actual reality. And I'll go over briefly on today's agenda. Okay, we'll start by recapping the general principles of zero trust, which originally was conceived in the context of network security. And then we'll talk about what is the meaning of identity zero trust. What is the definition? What is the purposes? What are the KPIs? We'll go over the implementation challenges, which are, I guess, rather obvious, much more than the answers. And then we'll present what we perceive as the 4 implementation pillars in order to actually understand, assess your environment, understand where you are in your zero trust journey, how you can make the right decision, what to prioritize, what to look at. And we'll go into details on each of them. And I would also say many security vendors get confused between the mean and the end. Now, zero trust, like many other security terms, it's a mean. It's not the end goal. The end goal is reduce attacks, become more secure. So therefore, along the presentation, we'll always illustrate what we say by taking examples from actual attacks. Some of them are high-profile attacks that you've read about in the papers. Some of them are attacks that our own research team, led by Yaron, had found and analyzed. And finally, after we've done all that, we'll present what we can say, sort of your checklist to assess your own zero trust readiness, understand where you are and what's the best way to proceed. So that's the agenda. Now let's start the actual session. So we have the core zero trust principles, right? I get this is relatively old news. There's some variations. I specifically like this one. Okay, the assume breach, verify explicitly, and use least privilege access. And and again, as I've said before, these were originally conceived in the notion of creating a better network security. And the assumed breach, for example, this concept was introduced under the notion that it's trivial that you check everything that comes from the outside into your network, but you should also assume, you should never take for granted that that network traffic within your network is legitimate, and hence you should verify explicitly. I would say that, again, one of the key terms to understand zero trust is acknowledge the implicit trust that today we have in our networks. And the verify explicitly says, forget about implicit trust. You can't trust anything, okay? Anything is untrusted until proven otherwise. And in that way, even if there's an assumed breach, even if you have a breach, so you can ensure that this network access or resource access is legitimate. And the use least privilege access, this final principle said this was introduced for the case in which there was indeed a malicious access that was performed. If beforehand you enforced a least privilege access, that would mitigate the harmful implications of this breach. So we have these three principles. Now, when we take all of them sort of and weld them into the identity control plane, so we need to revisit them and understand what exactly do they mean, and aligning with what I've just said before, I would say that when you take these principles and apply them to the identity control plane, what you gain is control from attacks that utilize compromised credentials to access targeted resources. Okay, in a way, that is the purpose, that is the KPI. The end goal of successful zero trust implementation is that I have a set of attacks or parts of attacks that once I have zero trust in my environment are either reduced or detected or prevented or handled more easily. And just to get an understanding what exactly these attacks are, I mean, let's go into the next slide and dive a bit deeper into that.
Yeah. So when you think about identity-based attacks, the common thing about them is compromised credentials, right? Because when you talk about identity, you need to somehow steal the identity of the user, and the identity is usually stolen in the form of a credential, and you can use that in many different parts of the attacks, right? Because it's not just to get into the network. It's not just to move laterally. It's all these things. So you can think about SaaS applications that if you want to steal data from a SaaS application, you need to take over some kind of an account, right? So that's an identity-based attack that requires stealing credentials for a cloud account. Then if it's in order to get access to a network or get access to some kind of network segment, then you're going to need to steal a credential to access a VPN or access a remote desktop or any type of remote access solution, and that's also often done with a compromised credential. And then if you're already in the network and the attacker is compromising an endpoint, then the attacker wants to move from one endpoint to taking control over the entire network or the entire environment. Maybe it's not a network, but something more complex, like something in the cloud. And then they need lateral movement. And with lateral movement, it's again a matter of obtaining credentials and using them to move laterally to additional computers.
Now, what is interesting is that I think this slide, I think from most to all of you, this is the first time that you see all these attacks gathered together. Because in the typical security stack in enterprises, these attacks are actually the protection against all these attacks, the account takeovers, the malicious remote access, the lateral movement that takes place either on-prem or in the cloud. The protection against them is actually dispersed between at least 3 or 4 different security products, right? If we're talking about account takeover of a SaaS application, so traditionally, if you can say traditionally, of technology that exists only for 10 years, but whatever, traditionally, it would belong to the CASB, right? Lateral movement on-prem, you count on your EDR. Malicious remote access, you are counting on your network, on network security controls, and so on and so forth. But actually, when you strip down all the all around details, you get to the core, and at the core, the key enabler of these attacks is an attacker that has obtained legitimate credentials and is logging in not using an exploit or malware or anything that is downright malicious, but is rather using the legitimate authentication infrastructure of your organization. Okay, if it's a lateral movement on-prem, it will be Active Directory. If it's an account takeover, it will be your cloud IDP. If you have an on-prem homegrown on-prem application, okay, it will be through the authentication interface of this application. And since all of these basically can be regarded as stemming from a single shared root cause, okay, and this is what identity zero trust is here to confront. And well, I know I really had my doubts, when I wrote this title. From buzzword to implementation, I asked myself, am I too hard on myself? Well, maybe. I don't think zero trust is a buzzword. I think zero trust is a vision. I think it's a game-changing vision. Okay, but because it is such a game-changing vision, a potential. It really creates many questions when you ask yourself, okay, I've convinced identity-based attacks need to be addressed by sort of centralized implementation of a approach that really tackles them at the root. But where do I start? I have an environment, okay? Maybe I have a cloud IDP and Active Directory. Maybe I'm totally cloud native. I was told there's some actually organizations who claim to be cloud native. How do I know what is the best place to start? How do I prioritize? How can I assess my environment's readiness? Can I get up tomorrow morning and say, okay, let's start the zero trust journey? Maybe I'm already there. What the different products that I have in my identity stack, in my security stack, how do they mount up when I want to do it? And I think one of the most important question is identity zero trust is zero sum game. Okay, and again, when you and again, we're also a security vendor. Okay, so we also sin in doing that. When you go to the website, when you read marketing material, you always find words such as eliminate, totally prevent, end-to-end, eradicate, craft your new brave world. I think when we're talking about actual implementation, so I think it's a valid question. Is that all or nothing? And the answer is, of course, no. If we are talking in a more realistic language, we're talking about contain, about reduce, about control, about understand. This is basically what we're here to what we're here to do. And now after this background, I think it was rather wide and deep background. We'll now shift to the actual content of this session, and this is our framework. We believe that if you want to break down a vision and turn it into a reality, a better reality than what you have now, okay, you should form a structured way to break it down, okay, to break it down and to match it into your existing practices, into what you do. And what we've come up with after, I would say, long and sometimes exhausting private journey that we've done, is we have these 4 pillars. Okay, I'll just read them out loud now. I won't explain that because this will soon come. It's unification, context, enforcement, and granularity. Each of these is a concrete criteria in which you can match or benchmark your environment against. And once you have all of them together, then they actually enable you to gain the set of capabilities that mount up to what we perceive identity zero trust to be, which is for each and every access attempt and authentication to apply continuous monitoring, risk analysis, and attack prevention where it needs where there is an attack. And let's start without further ado. Unification. So the definition of unification is the ability to have 360 real-time visibility. Talk about superlatives. 360 real-time visibility into every authentication and access attempt across all on-prem and cloud resources made by human and machine users through any access interface using any authentication protocol. Okay? Some of you might say, of course, we probably have it already. So I think I would appreciate, Yalon, if you could dive a bit deeper into that and explain why is it so challenging?
Yeah. So when we talk about unification, it's what Iftach just said. It's everything, right? It's all the applications, all the users in the environment, and then to have a unified security control over all of them is something challenging. The reason this is challenging is that in most of the environment, if environments are built from scratch perfectly, maybe they're built unified, from the start, but it's from our experience, it's very rare, right? Most organizations are not able to achieve a very unified approach from the beginning because they need to think about it from the start and then build a company and stay with these principles as the company grows. What we generally see is that organizations have multiple identity silos. So almost in every organization, there's going to be a cloud identity provider, right? And there's going to be an on-prem identity provider, right? So the cloud could be like Azure AD, Okta, any of the players there. The on-prem could be AD, could be all kinds of LDAP directories, but it's very hard to get by without one of them, right? So already you have 2 silos. Then sometimes you have federation servers, sometimes you have PAM. So there's all kinds of places where identity is being managed and secured in the organization. Some of these places it's mostly managed and less secured. So really, to be able to apply a unified layer of control over all of them is very challenging, right? There's solutions that are built for one or several of these platforms, but it's how to find a single solution that applies multi-factor authentication, risk-based authentication, monitoring in a very unified way across all of these silos.
I would also add that these different directories, they don't talk the same language. They don't, even if they don't, the logs that they generate, there is no standard or normalization between them. Plus, we have also the users. We have privileged users. We have standard users. You have service accounts, which is I would say I've never encountered an identity manager which, when I've asked them how many service accounts do you have, said, "Oh, of course I know. I have 117." It's always the time when you start to scratch your head. So the unification is a challenge, because by definition, our environments today are, I would say, almost they're fragmented by design. Okay, the default state is the fragmentation, and unification is what required to overcome this. Okay, and we'll now see again, as I've said before, I don't want to leave it just as an abstract notion. Let's look at at the infamous SunBurst attack. Okay, let Yaron go over the flow, explain what we see, and how had I had a unification implemented, what was the contribution of this unification to my ability to confront and understand this attack.
Right. So I think probably most of you are familiar with this attack. This was the SolarWinds infamous attack at the end of 2020, where attackers were able to take control over the update mechanism for the Orion server, which is a SolarWinds product. Through that, they were able to deliver malware into many organizations' networks. Right? The number was more than 10,000 customers that SolarWinds had. So they had, with this technique, they were already able to get initial access to a very large number of networks, which is pretty impressive. The thing is, if you look at all these customers, most of them were not completely compromised, because you needed a second step for the organization to actually be compromised. And that second step is lateral movement, right? Because it's one thing to be on the Orion server, which is just one server in the organization, and it's another thing of to be in all of the different servers and computers in the organization, or at least all of your targets. So the second phase that the attackers took was move from the Orion server to additional endpoints in the environment. And how do you do that? So apparently the Orion server, since this is it's a software that's built for monitoring your entire network, it needs a privileged service account. You just have to have it to actually use this piece of software. So if you're sitting on the Orion server, then you can steal the credentials of this service account, and you can use this service account to move to other computers in the environment. So with this lateral movement, that can take a few hops, right? It won't necessarily be like the first computer that you get to. But eventually, the attackers were able to reach federation servers, right? So, like, for example, the ADFS server. So once they were on a federation server, that gives them a gateway to the cloud, right? Because the federation server, what it does, it lets you authenticate to cloud applications using your on-prem identities. So if someone controls the federation server, they effectively have control over access to cloud applications. So taking control over the federation server, utilizing a technique called the golden SAML, the attacker was then able to access cloud accounts, access cloud applications, for example, email and other forms of of cloud applications. So with this attack has many steps, right? And really, it's not about one of these steps. Each one of these steps are not enough to achieve the attacker's goal, right? It's not enough to be on the Orion server. It's not enough to move to the ADFS server, and it's not enough to have the capability to jump from the ADFS server to the cloud if you don't have access to the ADFS server in the first place. For this kind of attack to be successful, it has to go through all of these phases. And now, if you think about the previous point of unification, really, if you want a solution to be able to see all of the different components of this attack, or at least some of them, you need to be able to connect the dots, right? Even if it's multiple solutions, you need to somehow correlate all of them and understand that there's an attack here that's composed of multiple steps, and each one of these steps could be seen innocent, but together this looks like an attack.
And I'll add also that even we're not even talking yet about preventing this attack, or detecting it in real time, but even just the ability to understand what is going on here. Because as you can see, from this point onwards, the whole movement of the attackers was entailed in using compromised credentials and either the service accounts or the ADFS server admins. And the unification basically says the first thing you need to have is to ensure that no matter what type of authentication is taking place, no matter what type of resources accessed, you know for sure that you are able to see everything. Okay, and that's really the first step. Now, and so let's do some kind of a self-assessment. Okay, and by the way, I think the first Paul question I think really relates to that. So, for example, do I have real-time visibility into all authentications and access attempts? Okay, and again, we'll later talk about, there's, first of all, the question is, do I have? And second is, how much effort do I need in order to get it? Okay, because again, as we've said before, in a fragmented environment, so there might be some place that there might be a directory with logs of SASA. In that case, for example, so I have the Federation server. Okay, I can definitely look at the logs of the Federation server. I also have the Active Directory. Okay, in that case, if I acted according to the best practices, and enabled special certain events to be logged, I might see it over there. But how easy it is, okay, and that leads us to the second question: is that visibility available to me in a single interface, or do I have to put some kind of an effort in order to get it from all places? And are there maybe any places that it even can't see at all? Okay, for example, there might be, and it happens a lot, that again, as I said before, that you're not aware, for example, of all the service accounts that you have, okay, or you don't know that a certain account is a service account because 6 months ago some admin created it in order to automate a repetitive and annoying task. 2 weeks afterwards, this admin, he was laid off or maybe promoted to be an executive, who knows? But the service account stayed. So do I have blind spots? Do I see everything? Is it easy? Can I discern between standard users and privileged users? Okay, many, I always say when an insight, finds its way into regulation frameworks, so then it's really reached the peak of the awareness. And I think every random security regulation relates to the fact that privileged users must be guarded. So can I discern between them, and can I do it easily, and can I discover my service accounts? All these are questions that I can ask myself, and the answer basically says, okay, so how far am I from a reasonable implementation of the unification pillar. And again, we're saying reasonable. It's not, I mean, I know I wrote before in the slide end-to-end or 360 visibility, bad habit, really. Forget the 360, okay? You can say 340 is good enough. No, maybe even 345 is good enough. But based on the way I understand my environment, you know, each and every one of you, in each and every organization, in each and every network, okay, these are the questions that enable me to say, okay, I'm not 360, I'm 190, okay, and I need to find a way in financial institution to service accounts, maybe, or maybe I need to enable some events in event logs in Active Directory. I might, okay. So this is the first step, okay? And I would say, again, really roughly, okay, that you need at least to get into the zone of the, I don't know, close to 300 in order to start considering the next step of the journey, okay, which is the next implementation pillar, the context, okay? In context, when we say context, we refer to the ability to continuously create a behavioral baseline profile for every user account. Again, every user account, service account, privilege accounts, third-party accounts, everybody, based on its entire authentication activity, again, across all enterprise resources, enabling reliable and high-precision risk analysis for every new access attempt to determine whether a given user can be trusted to access a resource or not, okay? And you see, I mean, this is quite lame graphics, okay? I can say it because I did it myself. But basically, you see here a user trail, okay? This user woke up in the morning, okay? Logged to his machine, and then accessed the database and opened his Office 365. And then for some reason, I don't know, PS exec'd his way into another machine, and from there to the Active Directory, okay? As Yolan said before, you can't look, I mean, each one of these activities might look totally benign. Actually, even all of them together might be benign. But the point is that you need to view them in the context of each other. You need to view them in the context of this user's regular behavior. You can go even beyond that and say, okay, in the context of the normal behavior for the user, for the group that this user belongs to, okay? And I think the only word that is more used as a buzzword than zero trust is AI or machine learning or algorithms, whatever. And I think the basic thing is, you know, everybody talks about algorithm, but in order to even start considering algorithm, you need to have all the data. So the unification pillar ensures that you have enough data for the algorithm to provide any value. Once you have this data, now you need to build the next layer, the layer of the context. And as we've done before, let's see what is the meaning of context in actual attack. And this attack, by the way, and I'll hand it to you. This is not something that you read about in the headline. This is actually a pattern that we've come to see in various from analyzing various data that we got from our install base. So I'll hand it to you to explain to us what we see here.
Yeah. So let's talk about how ransomware attack evolves and how we've seen it in data that we got from data that we got from customers and data that we got from other sources, to analyze really what's happening in an attack like this. So there's always the initial access, right? There's the initial access to the network. One example that we saw is using the proxy shell vulnerability. That's something quite recent. It's a vulnerability in on-prem Exchange servers. So a lot of organizations still use on-prem Exchange servers, and it was vulnerable to a proxy shell vulnerability that was basically a vulnerability in the auto discovery feature of Exchange, which allowed an attacker to deploy what's called a web shell on the Exchange server, which basically gave them remote access to the Exchange server just by sending messages to the Exchange infrastructure from outside the network, right? So it's a very powerful vulnerability because it was giving the attacker a way to execute code remotely on a server that's actually on-prem. So the initial access is really the first phase. Now the second part is compromising credentials. Again, that's when you're in a server as an attacker and you want to get to a second point, the first thing you look for is credentials. So what kind of credentials can we find on the Exchange server? Maybe we can find credentials of people that are administrating that server right now. And something else which is very easy to find is almost in every network, there's some kind of service account scanning the network and connecting to different endpoints, making sure they are upgraded, they're secure, they're monitored, their CPU doesn't get too high. But that requires a privileged service account that connects to these computers. And when accounts connect computers, they leave their credentials behind them. So if you found one of these accounts, you can use that for lateral movement to additional endpoints in the organization. Then at the next step, maybe you'll steal a regular admin credential and use that admin credential to do lateral movement to additional computers and servers in the environment, and that would eventually enable you to encrypt your targets, right? So that's so then you would execute your malware on the targets, encrypt the files, and require ransom, all of that. So in our case, we haven't seen the full attack unfold because we were able to stop it before it. But what we did see is that each of these steps requires a certain type of data, right? You need data about the service accounts. You need data about the admins, and you need data about the lateral movement performed by the admin. And if you look, for example, at the service account behavior, it may be not very surprising that a service account is accessing many computers in the network, because it's supposed to be accessing many computers in the network, right? It's a service account used for monitoring. So you really have to have the context of what it's usually doing to realize that something wrong is going on. And for example, one thing that's very different here than the normal behavior of the service account is that usually the service account is used from the monitoring software that it's accessing from. In this case, the service account was being used from the Exchange server, which is unusual. So this is something that raises a flag. This is something that, without the context about the behavior of the account in the organization, you wouldn't be able to detect the access.
And I think the same goes also for the admin credentials, right? I mean, because if you see a trail of the service account logging into a machine, and then all of a sudden from this machine, we have the admin logging into multiple other machines. Okay, so if you see the context, you see the trail, you say there is some. This is not a typical behavior of any user, let alone of two users combined. So if you remember, when we've talked about the silos that exist, the fragmentation of the identity stack, again, once you have all the data laid out, once Unification provided you the data, you can say, okay, I can see if I can see everything the service accounts does and everything that the admin does, okay, I can find patterns and I can see trails that might alarm me because they're different than what they should do. And of course, this is a rather simplified view. Okay, in truth, this attack involved much more machines and much more hops. But this really illustrates why when you're talking about identity-based attacks, when we talk why the context is imperative in order to have the type of identity zero trust that is tasked with confronting and attempt to mitigate this attacks. Same as before. So self-assessment. Do I have a risk engine that can ingest all the authentication data? And remember, we said you might not have 360. That's good. Okay, I have 290. Okay, is all this 290 data, that visibility that I have, okay, this 290 unification, is it poured into centralized risk engine, like a SIEM or SIEM or UBA or something like that, or do I have several disparate engines that cover authentication? Now, you might think, what would you say is the main difference? Like what is the gap that I get when I have cover everything but with several engines rather than one?
Right. So I think these attacks that we showed are exactly the thing that you might miss, right? Because you might see one portion of the attack, and that may look fine to one risk engine, and then a second portion of the attack that might look fine to a second risk engine. But when you combine these, you see that the last endpoint that the first part of the attack reached was the first endpoint that the second part of the attack came from. When you combine this information, then maybe a combined risk engine can detect that there's something more suspicious.
And I think the final question, the most important, is: can my risk engine determine reliably when a given authentication is legitimate or malicious? And this is really far from trivial, because as we've said, like as opposed, for example, to the malware world or to the exploit world, which manifests in an anomalous process behavior, a process that does something that no legitimate process should do. Okay, here when we're talking about the identity, in essence, if I, as an attacker, I now perform lateral movement using WMI or PSExec or RDP, in essence, I'm performing an action which is 100%. Okay, this is a true superlative. It's 100% equal to the way a legitimate user would have done that. Okay, and the task of the context, the KPI of the context, is the ability to say, despite the fact that these credentials are valid and this username is valid, we know because of the overall story that we see here that they're malicious. That's basically the ultimate KPI for the context pillar. We'll now proceed into the third, which is enforcement. And that basically you can say in terms of, I would say in terms of security, common security terminology, so far we've taught unification sort of corresponds to visibility, okay? And context corresponds to detection. And enforcement, that's basically the prevention, the proactive prevention there. And this is the ability to trigger secure access controls via configured policy across every type of user access interface or resource in order to prevent in real time any malicious activity that attempts to utilize compromised credentials to access targeted resources. Okay, so let's assume we're now in doomsday. We have here the attacker. The attacker has the compromised credentials. Okay, now when he's logging in, we expect that following the context that was founded on the visibility, this context can also trigger an actual protective act. Again, the same way that we expect an endpoint protection to terminate a malicious process or do we expect a firewall to block malicious traffic? Here, the enforcement layer, the enforcement pillar of the identity zero trust is the ability to translate the context into actual enforcement. This enforcement might come in many ways. It could be MFA, it could be block access. Okay, if you can't enforce, then at least maybe you should have some very near real-time sort of response automation. Okay, but this is the benchmark of the enforcement pillar. Okay, and also here we have a great example of a real-life attack. So I'm positive most of you have heard about it or read in the headline, the ransomware attack on Colonial pipeline. So Yaron, can you walk us through this?
Yeah, so I'll do this one fast just because I want to be able to complete all the pillars on time. So here, this attack started with the, again, initial access. So here the initial access did involve authentication, right? So it was authentication with compromised credentials to an inactive VPN account that didn't have MFA. So that's one step. The second step was doing lateral movement using PS exec and using RDP, all kinds of protocols that can be used to move from one computer to another. Eventually, they reached the domain controller, and then through the domain controller, they were able to propagate to an additional endpoints and computers in the environment and send the malware over to the other endpoints. So when you think about, and the last part, of course, is the execution of the malware. So when you think about the enforcement, there's several places where this attack can be prevented, and if you stop it in every one of these, any one of these steps, you're able to stop the attack and prevent the attacker from reaching their goal, right? So you can add MFA on your VPN, might be a good idea. Stop the malicious PSX or the malicious RDP, or maybe detect that the domain controller is pushing malware to the different endpoints in the environment. If you're able to do one of that would at least slow down the attacker, or maybe even completely stop it.
Mm-hmm. And again, and the self-assessment basically is, okay, so can I do that? Can I enforce rule-based or risk-based access policy across all my resources? Both cloud, on-prem, remote connection. Can I apply MFA to all my resources and access interfaces? We've seen, for example, in this attack that the attacker has used PS exec, okay, or network shares. Can I apply MFA? Sometimes I can't. I need to consider what I can do. And then again, I will continuously repeat it. It's not a zero-sum game. Okay, so if I can't prevent, okay, so maybe I need to invest extra effort in near real-time detection and response. Again, as always, the final question is the most important. Do I have the ability to block malicious authentication in real time? Okay, and as we've said before, the protection today is dispersed between various products, and it's okay. It's like, can my EDRs and CASBs and maybe network traffic analysis, or maybe can all of them join forces, okay, in blocking my malicious authentication in real time? Okay, that's the enforcement pillar, which I think is the most straightforward. The fourth one is actually interesting because the first three are built one lead to the other. The fourth pillar, the granularity, actually looks at all of them from above. And basically, it's the ability to apply the entire zero trust flow upon each individual resource access. Okay, meaning that the user needs to regain trust with every new access attempt. And as you can see here in the diagram, I have here three machines that all of them belong to the same network segment. Okay, now, for example, if I would implement zero trust in the zero trust approach on the networking level, which is also very recommended. Okay, so basically the security checkpoint would be at the gateway of this segment, and once somehow the attacker would be able to bypass it, it would have access to all machines within the segment. Now, because we're talking about identity and we're talking about authentication and access attempt, basically we require the all this flow, the unification, the risk the monitoring, the risk context-based risk analysis, and the enforcement to take place upon each individual resource access. Or I would rephrase, to have the ability to control the level of granularity. Okay, I might think that I'm settled with just one security check, but I must have the ability to fine-tune it even more. Okay, so in that case, even if an attacker has successfully compromised this machine, still when you attempt to access the other one, the whole risk analysis and enforcement chain reaction will be launched all over again. And the self-assessment here is real simple. Okay, it assumes that I already have the zero trust in place, so it might be a bit far off, but the unification context and enforcement pillars that I've built from the various components in my environment, can it be granular at the level of each resource access? Can I fine-tune it even more? Add some parameters like as connection length or others? Okay, this would definitely be that's the last stage, if you will. And if we're taking all of this together, okay, so we have here sort of I don't know, maybe a zero trust RFP. I can think of various names, but for each of this pillar, I ask, can I do that? Okay. Now, if I can't do it, too bad. If I can do it, the next question I need to ask myself is, okay, so what is the effort? Small, medium, large, maybe there is also extra small and extra large. Like, and for example, if today all my authentication logs from all my identity providers are sent into my SIEM, okay, and are normalized over there, it means that the unification is straightforward and easy. But if I have to write scripts to take them from this identity provider and that identity provider and work, with my standalone legacy application, so it might take if the effort, I would say, like, at the rule of thumb, when the effort is medium, okay, you should start getting concerned, because when the effort is medium and above, it means that even though you have theoretical capability, in practice you probably won't be able to implement it. So again, as Julie said, you'll get the PDF of these slides after we finish, and I definitely urge you to take it to your organization and start asking yourself, how do I match against it? And maybe there are even better questions that we didn't ask here, but the purpose of this session, the end result here, is to really give you a transparent tool that enables you to say, okay, this is what I have, this is where I am. Now I can make an informed decision where I want to go. And I think in this we have concluded. So if there are questions from the audience, we'd be happy to take them. And alternatively, if we've done such an amazing job, then it's all crystal clear and actionable. So in that case, we'll say thank you. And so thank to all the attendees, to Julie from IDSA. It's been a pleasure for us. We definitely hope it was informative and actionable for you as well. So
thank you all for attending.